Guess the worst city you've ever visited. Story 1 Cairo, 20-30 M people, no functioning garbage collection, total gridlock, no greenery anywhere, barely even any pavements, sweltering heat and smog, huge motorways and overpasses coming right up to the windows of dilapidated concrete apartment towers. A lot of the apartments were half-built and lacked windows but were occupied by people. An extremely creepy hostile atmosphere for women walking in public and scammers everywhere, the very definition of urban. Edit. It's quite amusing seeing some of the other quite nice cities listed here and imagining those people visiting Cairo. Story 2 I say this is Texan, Odessa and Midland, Texas are the closest thing to a colonized Mars that you can get, just emptiness and oil jack pumps everywhere along with poverty. But on the bright side, there's that big football stadium that inspired a heartbreaking novel, that inspired an underrated football movie, and that inspired an award-winning TV show about life and football. The novel, movie and TV show are called Friday Night Lights. Story 3 I went to Port-au-Prince, Haiti on a business trip with a local nonprofit. The place is a literal hole. We did not end up investing there, we had to bribe our way out. Story 4 Anlurfa, Turkey. It's from my own country BTW. It's scorching hot but believe it or not that was least of my problems. Whole place is dirty as, people are loud and rude, cuisine is overhyped and everywhere looks like Dust 2 from Counter-Strike. Story 5 Managua, Nicaragua. Saw little kids with rings of gold and silver spray paint covering their nose and mouth, begging for change at every intersection. If the kid got money, they would run back to an adult, hand the money over and get a huff off of a bag full of aerosolized spray paint. Doormen at the hotel were packing MP5s under their jacket. Raw sewage running in the waterways, at least it smelled like sewage. Wasn't going to check. Honorable mention Fresno, California. Only city I've ever felt wary. I've walked through rough parts of SF, NYC and a few others. No problem, just kept to myself. Fresno has a palpable air of GTFO. Story 6 Dhaka. Teeming with people, open sewage by the roads, straight-up Mad Max-style vehicles and traffic, god-awful weather, super hot and sweaty, an unescapable stink across the whole city. People literally stare at you like an alien if you're 4-0, and a woman tried to hand me and my colleague a baby out of the blue, then started screaming murder when we didn't want to take it. God-awful place. Story 7 Ashgabat. Sure, it's gorgeous with its white marble and gold buildings and monuments, but the absence of people, the blatant corruption, the constant surveillance, the human rights issues etc., not worth ever going back to. Story 8 The poverty and orphans I met and saw in Moscow in 1992 has stuck with me ever since. Obviously not as bad as some of the examples here, but still it was genuinely horrific. Story 9 Karachi, Pakistan. Wildly overcrowded and stank. ETA my visit was in 1987, so lots of things have probably changed, but the infrastructure at the time was built out for 2 million people and more than 7 million lived there at the time. Story 10 Nobody here has gone to Port-au-Prince here, so they are still listing heavenly places like Cairo or Phoenix. You literally just want to die every minute you are there. So much crime, so much poverty. There are still collapsed buildings from an earthquake 15 years ago. The entire country is basically under anarchy. It's like cartels don't even want to operate there as a midpoint. Story 11 I stopped in Gary, Indiana on the way to Chicago, and I think I'd rather spend a night in a haunted house than another hour there. Just a bunch of nothing surrounded by people looking upset. Story 12 Moscow in the 90s for the arranged marriage of my brother on the spectrum. They first had to pay a restaurant to open. The entertainment was my new SIL's brother on some keyboard singing a poor version of him, an Englishman in New York. It was so bad. Story 13 Not quite a city but Awano, Ecuador. I am sure nearly none of you have heard of it. Please do yourself a favor and look it up, and go to Google Images and just look at the first bunch. It is in the Amazon rainforest, at the final brink of civilization before you enter no man's land. You basically can only get there by way of motorized canoe up the Rio Napo, and it is just the most stark, hit-you-in-the-face poverty with no hope of changing it, place I've ever seen. There are poor people all over the world, even in the richest American cities, but these people in Awano really seem to be the ones who just solemnly knew they were never going to make it out. Amazing people otherwise, welcoming and creative, but so sad, and the place is so trashy. Story 14 Alexandra, South Africa. I'm not sure if it counts as an independent city or if it's technically part of the Johannesburg metropolitan area, but it's worth an honorable mention. There are a lot of rough places in South Africa, but I've never been anywhere like Alexandria. A massive and sprawling slum that has some of the most brutal poverty you will see anywhere, unpaved roads, overflowing sewage in the streets, entire families crammed into tiny shacks of sheets of corrugated steel, burning tires, piles of trash and broken bottles, crime, gang warfare, and violence hang over the township like a suffocating miasma. Do not go there at night. Pray that you don't have engine troubles as you pass through. If you find yourself there without a really good reason, then you need to reconsider some of your life decisions. Story 15 in the U.S. Phoenix by a mile. So much sprawl and so many strip malls, the city is like one big copy-paste. In the world, Delhi, India, garbage, pollution and overpopulation and scammers everywhere, although the food is great. Story 16 Albuquerque, New Mexico. Visits going on 5 years now and I'm still trying to get out. Weather sucks 7 months out of the year, crime and road rage are insane, and the people generally don't give about anything but themselves. Food's good though. Story 17 Houston, WTF, suburban sprawl, Houston edit Lil Texans all but heard it's hilarious Texans, all my Yankee there's a little town on the border of California and Arizona called Needles, right before after the long stretch of Mojave Desert on I-40 and they know it. Rude AF, incredibly expensive for no reason, and no redeeming qualities from what I could tell. If you can hold out for Kingman, Arizona, do it, if not, do what you need to do beforehand. Story 18 in the world Port-au-Prince, specifically Cité Soleil. I don't have the time to explain the horrors there but look up the place if you have a bit. In the States, probably West Memphis, Arkansas, there's a lot to choose from. I've been to many southern high-crime cities that sucked. Story 19 Naples, hands down. I visited on my 21st birthday. City was disgusting, scary men were lining the streets, and I was very aggressively grabbed and catcalled the entire visit, 0-10. Story 20 Baghdad. The locals in some areas keep trying to kill me and my coworkers. Edit I just remember driving through Baltimore at around 3:00 a.m., and I think I felt safer in Baghdad. Story 21 Waco, Texas. Thought there would be some action downtown on a Baylor football game night. Hardly any bars or nightlife. I think there's a referendum against any sort of fun in that town. Story 22 Guayaquil, Ecuador. Edit. I was dropped off after 12 a.m. on a side street near to nothing that seemed worth stopping for. I don't scare easy and have been in some very bad parts PF bad towns, but this felt like I could disappear a bit too easily. The driver unceremoniously ignored my attempts for information and I was alone, but it was not quiet. I had just laid eyes on a hotel sign just before being dropped off, so headed quickly in that direction. I dodged the light of burning trash cans in alleys and moved quickly, but by the time I saw a clean shot to the hotel, I had attracted attention and had some zombie stragglers catching up to me until I knew I had it in me and sprinted the last block or so. I was charged $200 for a room with no hot water, immediately cut my foot on a piece of a broken bottle on the floor that hadn't been cleaned up, and the power went out for most of the night. It may have its charms, but I couldn't find them. Story 23 I've been to over 40 countries on every continent except Antarctica, most of it traveling via motorcycle, so I've seen all the random little towns and villages in between the major ones and in some extremely remote places. My answer is Minot, North Dakota, USA, that place Stockton, CA. Story 24 Bogalusa, Louisiana, purely because of the smell. It's been over 30 years since I have been there, so maybe the paper mill is gone now, but 30 years ago, it was the most atrocious smelling city I have ever been in. I have lived in other cities that were also pretty bad about air pollution, but none of them compared to the odor from that paper mill. Story 25 My wife and I drove my mother-in-law from Ohio to Georgia so she could visit her prison boyfriend. I don't remember what city it was, and I think that's a good thing. Story 26 Any big city in Florida, but Miami area. You have tons of influencer types taking over the city creating content. Crypto bros renting expensive cars and racing them at everyone's risk at 10 a.m. on major roads. It's an intellectual third world city. Story 27 Caracas, Venezuela. We were obviously rich Americans, being squired through the hot streets in an unmarked white Mercedes van. The sweltering city teeming with people whose stares ranged from unfriendly to openly hostile, being told by hotel staff that we should tip in US dollars if we knew what was good for us. Sleeping with open windows because the hotel room air conditioners were broken, and hearing the chatter of sporadic automatic weapons fire through the night only blocks away, as rival gangs battled for turf, being told it was unsafe to walk the local streets, even in daylight. But doing it anyway, and seeing desperately poor people washing themselves in the open sewage water canal. Story 28 Vegas. Not for any of the reasons we know it as. I went during the heat waves pre-2020, went near Death Valley on the hottest day it had. Vegas is gonna die a slow, burning death. Even if it did get flooded years ago, gambling is sad enough. But, the dudes slapping cards on the strip, the tourist traps across all known asphalt roads. And weed everywhere. Within the last decade Vegas appealed to the rich and lavish only. But man, lot of poor folks go to Vegas. Some die in Vegas. Vegas is a money hole in the desert, but the longer you stay the more you see what happens when you stay in Vegas. Closest hole I got to me beyond small towns and drug den townships. It's amazing how Vegas somehow got worse. Dhaka, Bangladesh. Unbelievably crowded, terrible food, rampant with disease and filth. Story 29 Colombo, Sri Lanka. Country has many lovely places and met some nice people but the city was dirty, full of creeps who hassled my wife, and it was boiling hot and I nearly fell into a sewer cause a paving slab was broken. Story 30 Morgantown, West Virginia. I enjoy visiting post-industrial cities, but found the people in Morgantown to be strangely dull. They seemed permanently stunned or something. Pretty much every person we came into contact with had weirdly flat energy. Dead-eyed. It was bizarre. Story 31 I'm surprised Dubai isn't at or near the top yet. It's completely soulless and you'll barely encounter a native Emirati there at all. It's basically a rich person's playground that was built by slave labor. Story 32 Montego Bay, Jamaica. Have been multiple times and won't be back. The absolute rudest people I have ever encountered in day-to-day life. I get it I'm not from there but when your 40% of your GDP relies on tourism you would think these people would be nicer. Note wasn't on a cruise. Wasn't with a large group traveled alone to a convention. Encountered this multiple places across Jamaica. Story 33 Middle class comfortable bias here but for me Atlantic City. Just a sad place. Definitely saw it when it was in a deep decline. Jacksonville, Florida felt pretty boring and unremarkable. My wife voted Orlando. Outside of the theme park's a pretty bland place. Story 34. I have been on all continents except Antarctica. I have visited famous cities, big and small, the Western world, the Eastern world, the Middle East, Africa, everywhere. I have seen favelas in South America and the slums of India. I have seen bodies and human waste floating the Ganges, and people waiting in it. I have seen starving humans begging with their hands out. But the worst city I have ever been to, where I most feared for my life, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Story 35. Nairobi. The slums were unbelievably terrible, contrasting with a home we visited in a walled community with guards and razor wire. The home we went to also had its own wall, razor wire and guards. In Nairobi, it seems like you're either insanely rich or insanely poor, and the poor vastly outnumber the rich. Even McDonald's had fences topped with razor wire. Branson, Missouri, gross. Almost any city in Florida. If it's not overrated, it's just uninteresting. Story 36. Orlando, Florida. Don't get me wrong. It's a wonderful city, but the humidity. I was in Disney World and miserable AF. I was sweating and it was raining, but it was like hot rain. I'm not even a sweaty person. I thought the Filipinas humidity was bad, but after Florida, you'll never complain about the Filipinas weather ever again. Not to mention, the hotel my mom booked had a lake with gators in the back. Excuse me, they could just come up. Story 37. Fayetteville, North Carolina. Right outside of FT Bragg. I used to travel a lot for the Army as a contractor, and that was the only town they sent me where I really wished I was armed. Story 38. Las Vegas, Nevada. Apart from the Strip, which got boring very quickly, it was a display of massive homelessness. I saw people occasionally shitting on the street. I also got racially abused by homeless people on my way home from work, and I never felt completely safe in my apartment. Oh, my bike got stolen as well. I'm no longer in the US, but whenever I thought of my time in Vegas I shiver. Of a city, Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada. Story 39. Paris is a gorgeous city, but my experience with the people living there made the city the worst one. Sometimes you can come by one rude person, most often none, but I think a majority of the people we met was unpleasant. The police, train staff, restaurant and kiosk people. Story 40. Columbia, South Carolina. I woke up as we passed the city limits, only to see cop cars blasting their lights in a bank parking lot, with a group of cops circling a guy on the ground with guns drawn. Then the one closest literally stomped on the guy's head, and we drove on. We were there for almost 6 months, and that turned out to be the best interaction between citizens we experienced. Story 41. Barrie, Ontario. It is a seemingly quaint, boring, unassuming, mid-sized, nothing to write home about place at first glance. Then we pulled up onto the main strip on Friday night, and I've never seen more sketchy meth heads, crackheads, junkies and violent drunks per capita, concentrated into one place at one time. As soon as I parked, the car was assailed by hobos asking for money and cigarettes, people screaming at nothing all down the street. A crackhead lady tried to fight me, then showed me her pubes. A lady threw herself screaming onto the hood of a moving truck across the street. Story 42. Varanasi. I now pronounce it very nasty. Apologies to those who it's their holy city. I just couldn't get over the mounds of trash rotting on the sidewalks. I threw away my shoes as soon as I left. Story 43. I've been lucky to travel to nicer places internationally, so no bad luck there. But I once had the misfortune to find myself in Coffee, Missouri. That was the single shittiest town I've ever seen in my life. Absolute poverty and complete ignorance at every turn. I stopped at a gas station and the clerk shut my pump off because he didn't want a northerner at his store. I'm from the upper Midwest. I told him to get a grip and give me my gas, and he told me he was calling the cops if I didn't leave. I ended up going to the next town of Jameson, which didn't have a gas station. Then the next town of Gallatin, where the local Casey's General Store had 3 men with no shoes, covered in dirt, wearing nothing but overalls, were eating lunch. They were actually pretty nice. Gary does though. It's a different kind of than Missouri though. Story 44. Fresno, California. Went there on tour as a DJ. It was the longest, wildest, hottest, sweatiest day I've had on the road. Got with for parking in front of a biker gang's hangout. Saw a person trying to climb the fence on an overpass while a worker tried to pull him back. Venue owner threatened me for the show running late. Had a dude come up to our hotel room balcony telling us he just got out of jail. Then out of nowhere he grabbed a full cup of water and poured it over his head and asked if he could come party. There are like 11 more stories that happened that one day, but I am good on going back. Story 45. Walked by a Jewish cemetery in Zyrony, Poland, where someone put a toilet on a grave. Some homeless guy was living there and had trashed the whole place. Story 46. Oakland, California. My flight landed in the evening. The airport itself looked poorly maintained, like cracked runways, weeds growing uncontrollably, and the terminal gave off a depressing aura all around. A very ugly place. The rental car place at the airport, the employee at the gate to the exit as I was driving out, he warned me not to stop for gas or food anywhere nearby. He was right. Everything around the airport looked sketchy, and I didn't stop until I was halfway to Fresno. Story 47. I'm from the UK and traveled all over the world. I went to Memphis last year and I've never felt so unsafe in all my life. Spent the whole time on edge and couldn't enjoy it, sadly. Story 48. Not on the level of some of the cities listed, but Denver, Colorado. I've never seen a US city with a new high-end high-rise on one side of the street and a homeless camp the size of a pro football field on the other. Story 49 spent one evening night in Jacksonville and that was enough. The hotel we booked online had bullet holes in several doors. We cancelled and booked another, only to discover that the new one had a mini police station set up in one of the rooms. We stuck it out and didn't leave the room or even walk close to the window until we were ready to leave. Chillicothe, Ohio, is a very close second. On trips to see my parents, would end up having to stop in Chillicothe and always ran into really sketchy people. It didn't matter where we stopped, we always saw someone seriously off. Met you and Methany came in half-dressed, apparently feeling real good, and wanting to share the love with everyone, spoke loudly to everyone in the gas station, calling everyone beautiful and baby, talking about how they were partying, and inviting everyone to go with them. They started getting angry and louder when people didn't engage with them. I shoved my kids out of that station as fast as I could. Story 50. I've been to most of the U.S. places listed here: Fresno, Stockton, East St. Louis, Baltimore City, No. 9th Ward, Jacksonville, Cairo, Illinois, Odessa, Memphis, Birmingham, Oakland, Houston, Vegas, Albuquerque, Laredo, Texas, NYC, Miami, Camden, Barstow, Bakersfield, Indy, LA, SF, El Paso, Birmingham, Syracuse, Decatur, Illinois, Detroit, Atlanta, Youngstown, Scranton, and yes, Gary several times and more, and I never had any trouble in any of them. Not saying they're nice places, but YMMV. That said, Stockton might have had the most foreboding vibe, Baltimore had the biggest pricks people, Laredo the worst poverty, East St. Louis has an appearance that belies its reputation, kind of like Compton, Cairo, Illinois the most downtrodden, abandon all hope feeling. But the absolute worst considering was Stillwater, Oklahoma, considering, because it's a major state university town, objectively, it can't compare with some of these other places, but for a college town it was awful. Only thing there is Boone Pickens' $300 million football stadium, bad roads, and hot, desperate, sun-baked ground. Story 51. Delhi, by far the most disgusting place I ever been. The smell is something I will never forget. I didn't even want to keep the shoes I wore. I swear the stench of the place was embedded into my nose for days afterwards. Even I left. Never in my life will I go there again. Story 52. As a kid, New York in the late 70s. As a child I was on the subway and about 4 gang members got on and started yelling at everyone. My mom elbowed me and kept repeating, "Look down. Look down." They made their way along the car and stopped to pick on one guy standing up. They took his wallet while verbally abusing him. When they opened his wallet he had a badge. "Are you a cop?" slap. The guy did nothing, didn't say anything, didn't do anything, just kept doing what we were doing, looking down. Subway stops and they finally get off. You could feel the tension lift. I must have been about 6 or 7 at the time. The while think lasted, I would say, 10 minutes or so. For the rest of the trip I did want to leave my aunt's house. I've never since been so homesick. Story 53. Paris. As much as I love the French, Paris was easily the worst city that I have been to. The sheer amount of tourists, the cigarette butts, ticks and fleas, and the general griminess was a bit much for me. Story 54. The keyword is visit. I've been to most of the cities listed here in the USA. They aren't the worst, but the biggest disappointment is probably Blythe. The Colorado River isn't that cute in person. Story 55. I haven't traveled much, so Portland, Oregon, and vomit in the streets was overwhelming. I am not exaggerating when I tell you that I passed the biggest pile of I've ever seen in my life and dry heaved the whole walk back to my hotel. I saw people shooting up, needles everywhere, people passed out all over the place, people experiencing mental health crises, screaming, blocking traffic, so many unhoused people living on the street in god-awful conditions. My heart aches for those people. I noped TF out of there and headed to the coast for the day instead of exploring the city like I had planned. I wasn't able to get back to my hotel upon returning for some time because of police taping off the intersection where a dead body lay in the street. Admittedly, I'm pretty sheltered because of where I grew up, so it was jarring and eye-opening. Story 56. Kathmandu, Nepal, chaotic, polluted, no road rules, and the constant honking of every single vehicle completely did my head in. Pokhara, by comparison, was an Eden. I pulled the finger at the city of Kathmandu as I flew out. Story 57. Dhaka, staring men everywhere, noise everywhere, dust and dirt everywhere, scams even at the airport, no AC at the airport, so sweating waiting there, nothing makes sense, hard to find information about basic things like buses. And having said all that, it's still better than smaller cities in that country since you can find things like public parks, coffee shops, a few international restaurants, embassies, etc. Story 58. Mumbai, mid-80s, when it still used the colonial name, the tin shack slums started miles from the city proper, in a thick band around its periphery. When we drove into town early in the morning, we learned not to look directly at the men and boys who came to the freeway ditch for their morning, complete with cup of water to clean up with. The poor children roamed in gangs. It was awful. Story 59. Cartagena, the city itself is boring, and you couldn't even walk 2 minutes without 5 different types of very persistent street vendors trying to sell you whatever they had. I lived in the me and know how to deal with these kind of people, but these were on a whole other level. Overall, you won't miss anything, and I wouldn't recommend to anyone. Story 60. Sarasota, Florida. I mean, it's not a literal war zone like some people are posting about, but it was miserably to be there and got worse the more I learned about the people. there's 4 demographics there. First, tourists, then rich snowbirds that own everything. They can be found operating their tourist-oriented businesses and restaurants by subsidizing their income with wage theft of the next demographic, which are in or fresh out of college, overly idealistic but basically impotent SJW pretentious early 20s who work all of the service industry jobs while doing nothing to actually help anyone but themselves and especially not help the 4th demographic, which are the impoverished homeless people who occupied any non-residential street that didn't have a restaurant on it with little tent cities. Everybody there sucked so much. Story 61 Bremen, Germany. I have to go every year for work, and I've been halfway around the world and back again, but it's the only place where I genuinely feel unsafe walking the street as a woman. 247, drug addicts, homeless people, random passers-by, everyone there is a potential harasser. I was once grabbed and harassed 4 times during a 10-minute walk to my hotel. God, I hate it there. Story 62 St. Cloud, Minnesota. For me, having canvassed for the Democrats during multiple campaign cycles, I can confirm that it's an absolute cesspool of bigotry. From a structural standpoint, it's nothing more than a string of Americana chains with absolutely no signature identity. Story 63 Gary, Indiana. That former industrial city is crumbling beyond belief. Crime is insane, buildings crumbling everywhere. It is practically an apocalyptic ghost town. I grew up barely an hour away from there in southwest Michigan, where the Jackson 5 and the entire Jackson family were huge celebrities at the height of their popularity. As they were from Gary, the home they lived in together was very modest. It's one of the few protected sites in that city. The loss of major steel and iron manufacturing facilities throughout the Rust Belt and Steel Corridor in the 1970s has really left such a poetic stain on the Midwestern region of the United States. Story 64 Jacksonville, North Carolina. It has anything and everything horrible any of the other mentioned cities have, with the added bonus of a strong possibility of getting yelled at by a Marine at Walmart. Honorable mention, every city in India.